good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're signing in from. I saw it was a pretty international audience today, so particularly appreciate you taking the time to join us. I've got with me today CEO of Highland Copper, Barry O'Shea, and company's project director, Dr. Wynand van Dyk. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Romeo.
Thanks, Romeo.
Awesome. So I'm eager today to go on a deep dive of Highland Copper's Copperwood project, which is the nature of today's event. Now, here's how today is going to work. I'm going to shoot it over to the gentlemen who are joining me here today for a presentation. I'll be interjecting, hopefully not too much, but at least a couple times with some of my questions as we go through it. I've then got some questions likely for them following the presentation. But this is an interactive event, and I'd be very eager for the folks in the room to ask your own questions during today's event. So there's a chat button on the bottom right of your screen. Please, at any time during today's event, click on it and ask any question that you'd like about the Copperwood project. If for whatever reason we don't get to your question today, ran out of time, something of that nature, still ask it. I'm going to make sure that the Highland team gets the transcript afterwards, so they'll be able to respond if there's any particular queries that we don't get to during today's event. I should also say that today's event is being recorded and will be available in your inbox probably early afternoon Eastern time. It'll also be on events.six.com and on Six's YouTube page. But enough out of me. I'll let Barry and Dr. Wynand get into the protein of today's event. Barry, I'll throw it to you.
Thanks, Romeo. It's really nice to be here to talk about Highland Copper. You know, one of the interesting things about Highland and arguably a knock against us in the past is that Copperwood is a project that has sat at the feasibility study level for a period of time. But I think everybody knows that now the US truly needs construction-ready assets. And that's why we're really stepping things forward here. You know, Romeo mentioned this is a true deep dive into Copperwood. The goal is to really help you understand the incremental steps to take this project from being a feasibility level study project, something of an option on copper price, to a truly construction-ready project. And to do that, the first thing that you need to do is put the right people in place, people who have had a history, not just in design, but also in construction, development, and operations. It brings, you know, real credibility to the company, specifically to our capacity to drive this project to a construction decision, and of course, into construction itself. And so with that, I'd like Wynand to introduce himself. I was very happy to have brought him into the company in September last year. He's been invaluable in the meantime, really driving the project and setting a path through engineering for a construction decision. Very happy with, you know, the history that he has, as I say, across all aspects of development and operations. And with that, Wynand, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Wynand van Dyk. I have the pleasure of being the project director for the Copperwood project. I joined the team, it's now 9 months ago. I'm a chemical engineer by trade. I've been in the mining business for 30 plus years of my life. Most of that time has been spent in developing projects, not just doing studies, actually executing projects, taking it all the way through to construction. Several concentrators, a smelter, several mines, several tailings dams. So yeah, with that, Barry, it's as always just a pleasure being part of the team.
Thanks, Wynand. So, you know, given that today the goal obviously is to do a deep dive on Copperwood, you're going to hear a lot more from Wynand today, because really it's he that's doing the work. You know, both on the engineering, of course, the site work that we're advancing quickly, and particularly the environmental work, and of course the metallurgical work that we're doing to improve the project, a whole host of things. But just as a quick refresher, let me walk you through a few slides just so you remember the overall investment thesis of the project. So Copperwood obviously is our 100% owned asset in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, an area with a deep history and deep heritage in mining. And we also own 1/3 of the White Pine project. It's about an hour down the road, two really nicely sequenced projects. And with respect to Copperwood, I mean, I do say this, and I think it's factual and true, it is one of the most advanced copper developers in the US, certainly held by a junior. That speaks to having permits in hand, a feasibility study complete, and naturally now getting the site ready, both through work and engineering that we're doing. So really looking forward to driving the region and driving this wonderful producer. You know, at a high level, I just wanted to talk about the US, I guess the macro situation in the US. And I think the executive order to increase domestic critical minerals, and specifically copper, has been very impactful. It's really brought visibility, I'd say, to the issue around critical minerals broadly. And most specifically, that executive order identified copper as a critical mineral in and of itself. So the need for near-term assets is increasingly visible. And I think that really just brings eyes to projects like ours. You'll probably know that it takes 15 to 20 years, certainly has historically in the US, to bring a project from first drill result through to construction and production. We're arguably in that 16 or 17 year mark and ready to move. And that tells you that we do stand ready. Being in the US location, I think, is important, and most specifically in the particular region that we operate. I do think it's very important that investors understand our local license to operate. This is the Upper Peninsula. It's an area over the last 150 years that has, mined copper for many, many decades. Interestingly, the White Pine project, our second project, was one of the last projects in the Western Upper Peninsula to close. Truly welcome back, and of course, doing it sustainably, but of course, bringing the economic impact that regions like that love. Permits in hand, and a resource scale that I'll show you really is excellent to build a producer around. And of course, I think one of our biggest value propositions being our leverage to changes in copper price, where a 25% increase in copper price from $4 to $5 gives a 300% increase in net asset value.
One thing I got, Barry, actually, before you move on, I know you mentioned the last slide, the U.S. really urgently needs that domestic copper supply. I've heard that before. You particularly hear, the president say stuff like it all the time. But I'm curious from your perspective, how actually critical is this need, and what role could Copperwood specifically play in addressing that shortage?
Well, thanks for the question, and yeah, this is a slide that we prepared to help people understand that, because it can be a bit of an overture to say that there's a supply-demand imbalance, and sometimes there are individuals that seem to argue that perhaps there isn't. But this is just a simple view that helps you understand. There's 1.1 million tons of mine production in the U.S., and you can see on the right-hand side there's 1.6 million tons of consumption. So just that in and of itself is a 500 ton shortfall. But interestingly, if you also look at smelter capacity, which interestingly is somewhat less than mine production in and of itself, that gap is even greater. So truthfully, the U.S. has two things to address. It has mine production to address, and that, I think, is what the executive order in particular is looking to do. Naturally, it's looking to facilitate permitting, but it's still in a sustainable manner. And it's also looking at ways to fund projects to get them over the hump of what truly is the most challenging piece of mining, which is to raise the construction capital. But the imbalance is real. That's a view of it on paper. And what I would say is that, that's the current view. If you bear in mind then the fact that actually demand is due to substantially increase while the supply side has been somewhat muted, I think you begin to understand the situation. And if we're, of course, Copperwood and White Pine, while it can't naturally resolve that total situation, it's going to be a whole host of projects coming online that really assists in this supply-demand imbalance. And so just a couple of other quick slides, just again setting the overall tone before I pass over to Wynand. A view of the two projects. I mentioned Copperwood. It's a multi-billion pound resource, 7.9 billion pounds defined, truly advancing towards construction, permitted, an initial 11-year mine life, but you'll see on here that there's an additional 79 million tons of inferred that are not included in the mine plan. So we certainly do see this as a 15 to 20-year mine life, producing a nice 30,000 tons per year. And really well sequenced is the White Pine project. You'll probably know that we sold 2/3 of that project about 18 months ago. And with good reason. We're putting our time, energy, and capital into Copperwood. And White Pine then is really keeping White Pine, Kinterra is keeping White Pine up to speed. It's a bigger project again, 5.4 billion pounds, and really driving itself nicely through engineering and permitting alongside our partner. And I mentioned leverage to copper price, a last kind of overriding slide here before I pass over to Wynand. It really shows you again on paper this optionality to copper price. At $4 copper, it's a nice robust 170 million NPV with an 18% IRR, so it works. But you'll know also that we've moved nicely past the 450 copper price range, arguably moving in the direction of $5. Incentive price that I would say a lot of copper producers are looking for. And at that price, it's a $507 million NPV, so a tripling of value, and really a value that steps well beyond, the initial capex. Not to mention, of course, we also have potential life of mine addition and other pieces that we can serve to add value there as well. And not to be lost in the mix by any means is our 34% interest in White Pine, which, again, just its 34% in interest at a $5 copper price is also approximately $500 million in net asset value. So acknowledging we're sitting in that 50 to 60 million market cap range today, there's some incredibly strong asset valuation targets to move to, specifically as we prove that this project can and will be built. And of course, against the macro backdrop in the US, that's getting increased visibility.
Sure. Before we throw it to Wynand, I do have one question. So I see, obviously I think the slide makes it pretty clear that you guys have got great leverage to copper price, but are there any other ways to improve the project internally that could affect the economic strength of Copperwood?
Yeah, so certainly, life of mine additions are important. There's 54 million tons that's in the measured and indicated category. That is the only category that gets utilized when you set up your initial mine life for a feasibility study. Broadly speaking, mining companies like us build out an investment case on a shorter mine life and then add mine life from their inferred category as time goes on. So I think that is arguably the most significant area. But there are other areas that I'd say, top of them is looking at the metallurgical recoveries of the project. And that's an area where Wynand is particularly busy. He's a PhD in extractive metallurgy, so exactly the right person to be looking at that. I won't steal his thunder. At this point, I'm going to pass over to him because he's really going to walk you through the things that we're doing to both de-risk and optimize the Copperwood project. So Wynand, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Appreciate it. Before stepping into just this deep dive in Copperwood, I think it's important just to take some time and just reflect a little bit about responsible project design and what it is. And I think it's fair to say the mining industry as a whole, historically, we don't have an amazing track record. But things have changed, and that's certainly changed over the last decade, with mines more and more proving that they can operate and they can operate responsibly. And it starts with a responsible project design. And for me, the key about this is actually embedding these things into the design right from the word go. You cannot try and bolt your environmental controls on at the end of the project as an afterthought. It has to actually be embedded in the project as you go along. So if you look at Copperwood, it's an underground mine, so it's not open cast, so the footprint is relatively small. We have elected not to draw water from Lake Superior. Water that leaves our site is subject to rigorous water treatment. We're enclosing the entire plant. So the entire footprint is as small as we possibly can. And we create these boundaries, or almost like a set of boundary conditions within which we want to design and operate this project. At the end, it's a risk-based approach. There's multiple layers of control that we put in place. So, we do have an impact, but then we create a wetland preservation area to offset that. And then you, on top of that, have financial insurance in place with the state of Michigan that should something go wrong, even then that can be covered for it. In the end, we want to create a positive community impact. We want to create these jobs. We want to be responsible in the way that we operate. But we would have failed if we created jobs and paid all of these taxes and you leave an environmental disaster behind. And it's literally that personal for us. And the starting point to all of this is our permitting process. We have, just as a reminder, we operate on private land, and therefore it's all about state permitting for us in this project. And we hold all of our 7 major permits required for the project, which is something that this is vital to us. It gives us the opportunity to actually bake all of these specifications, all of these controls, that's part and parcel of our permit, into the detailed design. It's not something that we try and bolt on at the end and as an afterthought. It is actually something that we have right there from the word go that we put pen on paper. Excuse me. Yep.
Sorry, if you don't mind, just before we jump forward, I know I'm trying to get into your head a little bit here, so pardon me, but I know different companies look at permitting different ways. Some, describe it as a hurdle to get through. Some describe it as a 4-letter word. It really depends on the company. I'm curious as to how Highland really thinks about permitting. Like, what is the strategy internally for how you're considering this process?
Yeah, we've heard people saying that permitting is just a piece of paper, and I think it's important to maybe step back a little bit and understand the Michigan permitting process, if you allow me. For us, permitting is front and center in what we do. In 2005, the elected officials in Michigan passed the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, Part 632. Which in essence created this framework for environmental and state resource protection. And this was developed by a team of stakeholders, including all the agencies, the Native American tribes, a lot of technical experts, and environmental groups. And there's 2 key agencies that's key in this permitting process. It's what we call EGLE, the Department of Environmental, Great Lakes and Energy, and then also the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. And these agencies have got really big staff of specialized professionals. They are competent individuals, scientists, they're engineers, experience far deeper than I've got. And their job is taking all of these laws and then translate it into, let's call it a set of rules that you have to comply with, which is actually expressed as a permit. And that permit is actually a contract between us and the state. It's like your home mortgage. You can't just walk away from your home mortgage if you decide you're not going to pay it anymore. At the end of the day, the same thing. The permit holder cannot just leave town and we leave our obligations behind. Now, obtaining these permits takes a large investment. This is in several cases multiple $1 million of work that goes in technical reports. So if it was a piece of paper or just a piece of paper, certainly it's an expensive piece of paper. And we have a team of experts in EGLE. They review that your application. There's a iterative process. During that, there's a public participation process where the public actually has time to comment. And to give you an example of that, this not drawing water from Lake Superior, that came out of our public participation process, where one of the comments was not to draw it. We've taken that abroad, and it's now built into the DNA of the project that we will not take it. So, integral part of how we operate. Okay, so moving ahead, just very briefly, quick recap of last year. Last year was all about setting the stage. We got the team in place. Very happy with my site team and my environmental team. Strong engagements with the unions. We've got a letter of intent signed with them, and we've started with all of our initial site works to get all of our what's called the site impacts basically complete. So if we go into what this year is all about, 2025 for us is focusing on mitigations. So where we had the impacts done in 2024, this is now about mitigations. Happy to report the Gypsy Creek Wetland Mitigation Project was constructed and finished in December. That included planting about 5,500 trees on site. That's that first picture. Also, the stream diversion project, all of the major construction work is complete on that. All the stream features, the internal wetland pockets, all of that work is done. And I'm very happy to report that all of that work, which is part of the original capital investment of this project, was done within time and within budget. And we're now moving into, let's call it a maintenance and monitoring phase. Looking ahead, bottom photo, construction season is upon us. So we've got the team on site currently. They are planting roughly 15,000 what's called bare rootstock trees, and they're seeding all of these wetland pockets in the stream diversions. A little bit later in the year, we'll install some timber bridges on site where we take out some existing or old culverts off-site, but part of our stream credits is we're taking out 5 undersized culverts and replacing it with a bridge at what's called Chote Road over Bluff Creek. And then we're also establishing our 700-odd acre wetland conservation area, which is also off-site. So this is, super important work for us. It's all about, impacts are down. Now let's get the mitigation work in place. Further to this, we've also commenced with the detail engineering process. So in January, we announced that we've engaged with DRA. They are commencing with the mine design, the portal, as well as the process plant. We're doing this as a very phased, disciplined process. So first phase for all of our engineering partners is a historical data review. So we literally go back the full history, review all of the technical information that's available for the project. And then the idea is that we will finalize or fix the design criteria so that when that is fixed, we can actually go full-blown into the front-end engineering process. So happy to report DRA, they've finished their historical data review. No fatal flaws were identified. There's no information gaps that we need, so we don't need expensive drilling programs or things like that. And they've actually commenced some trade-off studies at this point in time to further de-risk and optimize the project. And these trade-off studies from a de-risking perspective is things like, is battery electric vehicles available that we could use underground rather than diesel? What's the control system type that we want to use here and the communication backbone that runs through the plant and the underground mining? Do we mine with continuous miners called road headers, or are we going back to conventional jumbo drill and blast? So these are all trade-offs that we're saying, how do we minimize risk in terms of the project? And then there's trade-offs where we're optimizing things. So we're looking at how do we minimize comminution energy, for argument's sake. The biggest energy draw on any plant and mine is how you break these rocks. And we look at options of getting that as low as we possibly can. How do we bring ore out from underground? Do we use conveyors? Do we use trucks? And then very importantly, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, is how do we incorporate ultrafine flotation into our overall plant flow sheet? The second major piece of work is on the water management side. There we've engaged FOATH in February. Happy to report they've also finished the historical data review. They're progressing now where they're defining what's called the climatic design criteria. And this one is important. Do you design for 1 in 100 years? Do you design for 1 in 1,000 years? What does a maximum storm look like? What about snowfall and snow melt? All of these weather events has got an implication in terms of weather that we need to manage, but not just lots of water. Also, what happens if we have unseasonably low snowfall or unseasonably low rainfall? And they're actually updating our water balances now throughout each stage of the project. So there's a time when we're building it, there's a time when we do pre-development, then we're into operations, then the project turns water positive, then we close it, and then there's monitoring. Each one of those stages, they're looking at the overall water balance and figuring out how do we deal with either shortages or excess water. And then the last piece is the tailings disposal facility. There we've engaged Tetra Tech, so we now have all of our engineering teams on site or actually busy. They have just commenced the historical data review. Part of this work, very importantly, is reviewing all the geotechnical information. If you build a dam, you really want to know that wherever you build a dam, that area is stable and it can handle that load. But also importantly, that the wall structure, the material that you've got available to build the dam with, it will actually give you a stable wall. So they're busy with that review. And with the mine and the water management, the idea would be that once we go through the stage gate and step into front-end engineering, we'll go to a 35 to a 40% engineering. On the tailings dam specifically, the target is that we'll actually drive all the way to 85% engineering. And the reason for that is that we want early engagement with Eagle. This dam will be submitted to them, the design to the dam safety department. It gets signed off by Eagle before we actually go into construction of this dam. So vital piece of work for us. Want to spend some time just looking at the metallurgical drilling and testing. This is arguably one of the biggest opportunities for the project. In January, we engaged Timberline Drilling, and they put down about almost 2,000 meters of drill holes for us. We drilled PQ size holes, 85 millimeters, and the whole idea was we wanted to extract about 400 kilos of sample. We've actually put these drill holes down right next to 27. In 2017, we actually extract 5 metallurgical samples, and we put twin drill holes down right next to them. And there's some logic in this so that we can actually show the twinning behavior of the hole, statistical certainty, but also it allows us to compare this test work with the 2018 SGS test work. And that's all about just creating certainty that these are not just random improvements that you're showing. If you can replicate it and then you improve on it, there's a lot of statistical confidence that come from it. Now, that sample that got extracted, it was sent to Base Met Labs in British Columbia. We engaged them in February. They have subsequently prepared the master composite. Happy to say that we're capable of reproducing the 2018 SGS test work benchmark. So very happy with that. And we're now stepping into circuit and reagent optimization. And it's very early days, but man, we've seen some really encouraging results. And I'm cautiously optimistic that this will be a real value add for the project. The next piece of work after we've optimized the circuit is we'll bolt on the ultrafine flotation technology. This is another kick that we after. Here we're looking at dealing with these really fine particles that we have in some of our streams. The whole idea behind that is, rougher kinetics and cleaner kinetics will be done on a bench scale, and then we actually go to pilot level test work on both rougher and cleaner. And once we've done that, we'll actually look at the fine grinding signature plot and further solid liquid separation testing if needed. So where this entire drive for us here is we want to unlock additional value. This is all about shifting the grade recovery curve, optimizing the reagent suite, and we're pretty sure this could have a substantial impact on the project. All right. Lastly, I just want to talk and touch a little bit about just the ongoing community engagement that we've had, and the almost all overwhelming community support. We've got 22 formal resolutions of support from key townships, from the counties, from boards that's all in the district, and it has just literally been overwhelming. Every time I'm up in the Wakefield area, the question that I've been asked most is when are we going to have the mine up and running? We continue to engage with Eagle. We have regular visits with Eagle coming onto site, checking that permitting conditions, and we adhering to all of our permit conditions that's out there. But more than that, it's just a very collaborative working relationship that we've got going with the permitting authorities, and that's great. Furthermore, we've recently seen very strong support from the Upper Peninsula state legislators, from U.S. Congressman Jack Bergman. There's clear support from our key stakeholders, Governor Whitner, from the Michigan Building Trades, from the MEDC, the Economic Development Corporation, and Invest UP. And that just for us is at the heart of it all, being welcome in the area. And for those of you that want to see a little bit more on it, I'd refer you to the copperwoodproject.com website. It's all there's a lot of videos and stuff on there that just shows you where we are from a community perspective.
Got one quick one before you move on, actually.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's great to see all this community support and from various different locations, but zooming out, what is really the significance of collecting this type of support before going into production?
Yeah, great question, Romeo. As I said, this is about the license to operate. It's truly important for us to be welcome at all levels. We are also seeing the people of the Western UP speaking up, and there's several videos in that regard on just saying, you are welcome to operate in this area. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge there remains some opposition, and you know what, we remain open to constructive opposition comments, and we'll keep on listening to those comments as it is. But for us, it's about having that license to operate and being welcome in the area.
Appreciate that.
All right, so last slide from my side, I just want to briefly talk about White Pine and where we are. And just a reminder, White Pine gets managed by Kintera. They are a JV partner. A little bit of overview on Kintera. Last year was a real busy year for the project team. They drilled nearly 21,000 meters. They collected all their metallurgical and geotechnical samples, and they're advancing as we speak towards a resource update. They've done a substantial amount of environmental baselining, and we're really happy with that work that they're doing. They're continuing that work with some really good work in 2025. And at the end of the day, it's all about, if you have your resource update and you've got all, you can then start looking at permitting and permit submissions. And then lastly, they're stepping into some engineering trade-offs as well, looking at mine plan and metallurgical, and how do we optimize the recovery, because all of this is about stepping into PFS. So where Copperwood is driving towards a construction decision, White Pine is driving towards permitting and pre-feasibility, and it's just naturally giving us a nice sequential growth in as we progress along this pathway. With that, I hand over back to Barry.
Thanks, Wynand. Really appreciate all the detail, and I hope viewers who are taking part today do get a good sense that we're trying to demonstrate for you these really additional, strong, and tangible steps that we're taking to move the project forward. We're at a really interesting point in time here. As I mentioned, the U.S. desperately in need of construction-ready assets, and we're taking the steps to make Copperwood exactly that. And to support that, we're just showing some catalysts that helps, from stakeholders to investors really track as we go through this. And Q3, I think, is going to be very interesting. Obviously, completing our phase 1 engineering and getting the results in and around that, and looking at stepping through into our phase 2 of the engineering program. Probably of most significance, of course, is the ultrafine flotation testing. It's nice that as we progress and acknowledging again it is early stages, but the results are encouraging. When you think about the things that can impact a project, of course, copper price is arguably at the top of the list. But when you get into impacting your grade recovery curve, I think that is arguably the second most impactful. Naturally important to see some of those improvements, because of course we will also see some headwinds as we progress the project from an engineering perspective. In the second half of this year, we're looking to get visibility to the state grant. It's a $50 million grant that the MEDC proposed just over a year ago. I acknowledge, as I have in the past, we've had some challenges getting it through the final step. at the Senate Appropriations Committee. But I do think there's some relevance to this positive support that we're seeing both from the Michigan legislature, federal congressmen, and broadly across the board. And I'd say most specifically down to the local voices in the Western UP. They're all very supportive of this grant, and certainly hope that all of that support continues to be a catalyst as we drive that project, as we drive that grant to completion. I'd say of other important relevance thinking about key catalysts is that we've really kicked off a process to better understand our federal funding opportunities. I think that this executive order to increase domestic mineral production in the US is quite a game changer for projects of our nature. Certainly other projects of a similar status have seen some real boosts in terms of funding from the DOE, DOD, and the US Exim Bank. So that is an area that we are putting some time, energy, and capital into, working alongside some firms in DC to really understand what's available for us, think about how we get on priority lists, think about how we look at funding from a US federal perspective as well, and really look forward to that. All of this then, both from a funding perspective, an engineering perspective, and a site readiness perspective, at the end of the day, drives through to a construction decision and project financing. Naturally, you are needing to make the project as strong as you possibly can in all the ways that we are to support yourself through diligence and project financing. And as we get through the tail end of this year, certainly into early next year, we think we're going to be very well positioned. Do also think that the copper price is going to cooperate along that period of time. We're seeing a bit of easing in terms of trade wars, obviously ongoing visibility to the need of copper in the US and of course globally. So feeling very well positioned there. And at White Pine, as I say, while we're putting all of our time and energy into Copperwood, we're very pleased that our partner, Kinterra, who are strong both from a technical and financial perspective, are driving at speed on White Pine, and we'll look forward to let our 1/3 stake continue to increase in value as they drive that. And just a last slide here before Romeo will happily pass back over to you for some questions, be it that you have or that investors online have. But just a refresher on the bigger picture here, this is really a regional play. I'll remind you, there is one other operating mine on the Upper Peninsula on the eastern side. It's the Eagle project. It's owned by Lundin. It's a copper nickel project. We're actually very thankful to them. They came back into the region probably 10 years ago, or maybe even a little more than that, with some skepticism as well in terms of how they would operate. But they've done everything right. They've operated responsibly from a community and from an environmental perspective, really set a stage. They've demonstrated that the Michigan regulation is strong. And if you adhere to it, of course, you can bring boosts to the economy. You can supplement tourism, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of environmental control. So we're very pleased to see that. So as we look at this western side of the UP, this east-west copper belt that had multiple mines over the past 100 years, it's really a region that, when done well, really can bring back that economic boost to the region, bring copper that is needed in the US, and arguably from our perspective, supplement tourism, certainly not hurt it. So a real opportunity from that perspective, developing a producer, thinking about moving out of what you will obviously know are the explorer developer, price to net asset value discounts into a cash flowing producer, obviously leveraged changes in copper price, and a real alignment to the critical mineral strategy in the US. So just demonstrating that we're in the right place at the right time here. Looking very forward to kind of progressing this bigger picture, and really at the end of the day, surfacing some of the value that we know to be there. This is a multi-billion-pound permitted copper project that simply shouldn't be valued arguably as modestly as it is from our market cap perspective. So we look forward to it. And with that, Romeo, happy to hear if you have any questions. Happy to look at the themes, obviously, of the company, but also very detailed questions from an engineering perspective, having Wynand here also.
Great. Well, in that vein, I got some for both of you, actually. So I got some of my own, but then I do want to get into the great questions from the chat, and then some that came in over email as well. One, Dr. Wynand, I'll actually start with you, if you don't mind. I know you mentioned water management during your presentation, but I wanted to get into it a bit more, just to get a better understanding of how Highland is thinking about it. Because I know sometimes water management can really become the focus of opposition efforts to a project. And what I'm really curious is, how are you thinking of managing water at the project site throughout the course of the mine life?
Yeah, it's more than just thinking about it. We're actually doing it, Romeo, because we've already impacting. We built those
Sure.
streams and we built those wetlands. So it's at this point in time, it's all about sediment control, which is really important for us. But from a big picture, if we step out of the detail, it starts with where do you get your water from, and then what do you do with your water, in very simplistic terms. It's important to realize that things are never static, and there's always probabilities in terms of what's the probability of a storm event, what's the probability of drought. So this all starts with an overall model, and it's a stochastic model, so that you look across the entire site and you look across that entire site over time. So what happens today is different than it will be when we start putting yellow metal in the ground and we start touching the ore body, and it will be different when we actually starting to go underground, and it goes different again when the plant starts operating. So you have to understand that and literally think through every single scenario, because it cannot be a surprise. If it's a surprise, it's too late. You've got to be ready to react ahead of time. So in big picture, collect and store all the water up front, so that because we're not drawing from Lake Superior, we have got water to start this project. The initial indications are from these models are that there will be a period that the project is water negative, so we need to use water, and that'll be actually from water, contact water that's in contact in site, not releasing it from site, storing it all and reusing all of that water. At a point in time, the project becomes water positive, and then under those circumstances, now you've got to release water from the site. We'll actually have a water treatment site, a water treatment plant that will be able to release water that is as per every single condition that's in the permit, and that is whether it's heavy metals or any sort of pollutants. All of those are specified to concentration levels that you got to hit, and this is it's a high-tech water plant, reverse osmosis water plant that you then put in to actually have clean water leaving the site.
Great. I do have one follow-up question to that, actually. I've read, I read opposition materials to mining projects fairly frequently, and I know I've heard the expression that all sulfide mines pollute water sources, kind of accepted as a maxim sometimes. And I'm curious, one, is that true? And two, if it isn't, what makes Copperwood different?
Yeah, look, there is unfortunately quite a lot of data on sulfide mines polluting water sources. And it's actually linked to what's called acid rock drainage. Historically, it's called acid mine drainage. Nowadays, we actually call it acid rock drainage. And it's very important, that distinction, because it's literally about what is the constituent of the rock that can create this acid. It's sulfuric acid that gets created. And at the heart of it is you start picking up problems if you have chalcopyrites and pyrites. So if there's iron present, then that creates the ability, when you're in contact with water, then you create the sulfuric acid and have the problems. Our mineral is chalcocite. You can look at the fundamental chemistry. You physically cannot produce that sulfuric acid in that reaction. Well, we didn't just rely on the fundamental chemistry. We actually did extensive geochemical testing. Every single test that gets prescribed, we actually went through and proven that this ore cannot generate acid. It's non-acid generating. We're actually in a fortunate position that, as I say, the proof is in the pudding. In the 1950s, there was actually a test shaft dug on site. That material that got extracted out of that shaft was left on surface. About a 2-acre area that's got this material. It's been exposed to rain, sun, wind, the elements. It's an unlined area. And there was quite a extensive piece of work done by Michigan Tech where they've published a peer review paper taking samples of water below this rock bar. So this is after 50 odd years of having all of this exposure. They found no evidence of acid mine drainage. As a matter of fact, interestingly, it's actually acid neutralizing, which chemically that's what it will be, and it's actually neutralizing some of the precipitation. But here's the overabundance. I can rely on that. I can say that's good enough. We spoke about responsible project design and risk management approach, layer upon layer of controls. So every single place where we have contact water, we actually have a double lining system. There's a clay lining system, and then it's an HDP lining system containing all of that. So even though we know we cannot generate it, we still containing all of our water and making sure that it cannot leave the site and actually treat it. So yeah, it's we're pretty sure that what we've got in place is abundance of control so that we don't impact this area.
Great. I don't know. I got a couple more for you. One, obviously, you sound really optimistic about the ultrafine flotation technology.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just for my ongoing education, as much as the people in the room, I'd be curious if you could elaborate on the technology and why you're so optimistic about its application here at Copperwood.
Yeah. Look, the optimum size range for flotation, and there's various meanings, but I would typically say 35 to 45 microns. Up to, let's call it 100 microns. Somewhere in that space is where flotation works really well. If you go above 100 micron, let's call it below 35 microns, you have this drop off in performance. And so that's driven the industry to almost two legs. There's this one side looking at coarse particle flotation, because if we can recover coarse particles, we don't have to pay the energy of milling it that fine. But there's also this another side which looks specifically at ultrafine flotation. The truth is ore bodies are becoming more and more difficult. They're becoming more finer, disseminated. If you take Copperwood, our liberation size is around about the 40 odd microns. So we have to mill fine. And when you're that fine, then it's all about how do you get the particle onto the bubble, and then how do I get selectivity? And that's where this ultrafine flotation technology is coming to the fore. For us, we are going down this pathway. There's a clear track record of these units. 400 plus of them have been installed worldwide. More than 150 in copper flotation, in ultrafine copper flotation, and with a large degree of success. And that's why I'm very optimistic about it. But let's wait for the results at the end of the day before I hang my jacket on this one, or my coat on this one.
No, appreciate it very much. Barry, I got a couple for you. I would love to get you in here. I got two on Copperwood and then one really, really briefly on white pine. Then there's some questions from the audience I want to jump into. So first is, and obviously answer this just to the best of your ability, but with the current, we'll call it geopolitical and domestic political situation, have you seen increased interest from potential strategic partners, particularly those looking for that domestic copper supply?
Yeah, in short, I would say the answer is yes. There's been an underinvestment, I'd say, for decades now in mining broadly. I do think that is due to change. But when you look at, obviously, the exploration and development area of the mining cycle, there's been underinvestment in juniors, certainly. That has a knock-on impact on the ability for intermediates and seniors to buy into ready, set exploration or development assets and progress them. And even at that intermediate and senior level, they haven't quite made a jump on their projects also. And in part, I think, because, mining investors, be it strategics or just be it retail institutional investors, are needing to see, a little more meat behind the cycle, not just initiating, but really well and truly taking hold. And I think that's happening now. Copper, once again, I think it saw a nice floor at about $4 over the last year. It seems as though we're seeing $4.50 at this point. The copper story is getting increased visibility. And as I mentioned, just from a trade perspective, globally, things are easing somewhat. So I'm hopeful that copper price continues to hold up. But what that means is you're going to start seeing investment again. into all areas there. But specifically, I think, those intermediates and seniors that haven't had the capacity to develop their own projects, or arguably don't have those projects in their pipeline, begin to look downward. And I truthfully think the first thing they look for are construction-ready, permitted assets in the U.S. So yeah, that would suffice to say that we are seeing some attention there. And the thing that we can do best to either solicit that ongoing attention or drive the project in and of ourselves is just to engineer, do our site work, keep our permits in good hand, do the metallurgical work to improve the project, truly make it construction ready.
Great. No, appreciate that. Then I got a couple of questions on timelines, and this reflects some of the questions that came in over email and some of the stuff in the chat as well. What are potential timelines you're looking at right now as you think about both funding, but also that construction decision at Copperwood?
Sure. Well, in fairness, I think the best thing for an investor to look back to is that catalyst list. So we've laid out really nicely the steps that we think that we need to take to prepare ourselves for project financing. And as you'll know, a project financing sits in advance of a full and final construction decision. You need to have the capital to step to that point. But our goal is to do all of those things, right? So I think we've laid out in Q3 a transition from phase 1 to phase 2 engineering, obviously, ideally building in any positive results from a network standpoint. Through the second half of this year, considering state and federal funding, seeing if there can be finalized or available to us, thinking about that from a project financing perspective. And then at a point, as you approach the end of your phase 2 engineering, and that's latter this year into early next year, you have full visibility to your project. You have capacity to defend your project in a technical due diligence, and you begin to parallel the path of your debt and equity raise through it into early and mid next year. All of those pieces kind of would tell us that if things progress as we would hope and expect, and of course the macro environment stays intact, that we'd be looking to make a construction decision in 2026. We will look at that point in time as to whether or not we have the construction window in a timely manner to initiate construction in early 2026, or if that would step into an early 2027 timeline. Under any circumstance, it's extremely near dated.
Perfect. No, appreciate that. One really last quick one before I jump into chat questions, just on White Pine. I know this is a Copperwood event, but I'm just curious. Looking back, is it progressing as you anticipated, Barry, the White Pine transaction with Kinterra?
Yeah, I do think it is. Kinterra, like I mentioned, they bring technical strength, and we've seen that in-house, and of course, in terms of the consultants that they use. And of course, they bring financial strength to drive a project of that nature. So from a corporate development perspective, we've been very comfortable. I will mention also, similar to us, obviously, I've put Wynand in place. They put a strong project director in place, very strong environmental and permitting director in place. And to see those people kind of, in place and on the ground, that tells you if the project is going to move forward or not. So they'll feel very comfortable there.
Awesome. I appreciate that. A couple of quick questions. Hopefully we'll have pretty brief answers to them. Jeff Fitkin from the chat asks, what species of trees were planted for the wetland creation project? Dr. Wynand, I guess that's to you.
Oh man, I wish I could pronounce some of these biological names. But look, we have pre-approved planting lists. That's part of the permit conditions. So in the wetlands is American larch, there's black spruce, musclewood, red maple, trying to think, yellow birch. So these are all trees that's in the area. Also, white pine, ironwood, hemlock, paper birch, and then there's also live stakes that go in, which is a different speciation set. So, all of these are done in conjunction with, let's call it, what do they call them? Plant biologists, people that's far more competent in that regard than I am. I just get the list and get somebody to execute accordingly.
Nope, makes sense. One question is, somebody's curious who's conducting the studies on risk reduction, tailings dam, etc.
Yeah, apologies, it didn't come across clearly. DRA is doing mine, process plant, so everything underground and surface, mine-wise. The water has been done by FOTH, F-O-T-H, and then the tailings dam is done by Tetra Tech. So 3 different engineering companies looking at all of this work.
Perfect. Appreciate it. Todd from the chat asks, do you have any geological information for the mining area that you can share? He offers as examples rock density, CIA rating, etc.
Yeah, it's obviously available, but I've got to go and have to dig that out. Yeah, I would refer people to our technical report. Most of the geological information is in there. It sits in the Nonsuch formation, but rock strength and rock density I don't have offhand. I apologize for that.
Perfect. Todd, I'll make sure that your question gets to the team. They can get back to you with a few more details if you're interested. One question, actually, there's a couple questions I'll lump together about the Michigan Senate process. Really, I think there's just people looking for a bit of clarification. Somebody notes they thought the grant expired at the end of last year, and then some people are just looking for general updates. So, Barry, I'll throw it to you to just give some clarification on that.
Yeah, so I think there might have been some press conflicting, I'd say, stories around that. No, the grant is absolutely not expired. It sits where it was, went through the NEDC, the Michigan Strategic Fund, and the House Appropriations Committee in 2024. It has taken time. There was some confusion because there was a thought that maybe it would expire at the end of December 31st, but that was not the case. It's not a legislative order, so it carries into this year. So yeah, we remain firmly in contact, honestly, with the Senate Appropriations Committee. They've had other issues, I'd say, to kind of get through this year, but I think it's going to come back into focus in the coming period. And we feel very comfortable when we speak about this project. When we speak about the environmental controls that are in place. I do know as well that the EGLE and the DNR provide feedback as well to the Senate to reflect that we continue to meet all of our obligations. It's interesting that this year, we're spending money fully on environmental mitigations, not quite yet building the project, but that's going to happen in the relatively near term. So we'll continue to move on that. Feel very comfortable with it. I don't want to make any projections about our likelihood of success because, of course, it has taken some time. But from my perspective, it's really important actually to the state of Michigan that they do reconcile this. For the economic success of this region in particular, it's going to be important, if not imperative, that mining works well alongside tourism and environmental controls.
Great. No, appreciate that. Shai from the chat asked, what's the latest status of the White Pine Silver Stream?
Yeah, so you might know, and I think Shay understands that as well, that there is a stream for the silver. Actually, on both projects, it's more impactful on White Pine, where there's a higher proportion of silver content. That stream is an option that Osisko can take, which they have partly executed at this point. There's no full answer on that, and to be candid, I also don't want to speak on Kinterra's behalf.
Sure.
As I understand it, it remains very important to them to restructure that stream. It's a challenging one to have in place in its current structure if you want to think about making a full construction decision. So, it's still reasonably early days as Kinterra progress through baselining and, of course, preparing for feasibility study. But I know it remains a very important thing for them to resolve in time.
Awesome. There's one question from the chat that's looking for some napkin math from you, Barry, so I'll throw it to you. But what's the ballpark of the IRR lift from ultrafine flotation or from federal assistance? They want to know if we're talking 150 or 450 BPS cumulatively each.
So let's start. So again, it depends on the quantum, naturally. We have seen on the federal side, there's been some pretty meaningful grants put into companies. Arguably one of the main areas that would be available to us would be the U.S. Ex-Im Bank. So that would be more on the debt side. And interestingly, the Department of Energy has also opened its loan program to mining companies. So, it would depend on the scale of that, be it grant or debt that we put in. It would be dependent on the terms of that grant relative to what we might get otherwise in the commercial market. So I'm going to hold off from doing that kind of math, other than to say naturally it would de-risk, improve the economics of the project, and really take away one of those larger risks around funding generally, certainly for a company of our scale. I'm going to be, unfortunately, a little more cagey even so on the network side. It's early stage, right? So
Sure.
I don't want to give any indications there. But I think we've reflected that into Q3. Certainly, we're going to start to get visibility around these things, and we're certainly going to do our best to quantify these things. But from a grant perspective and a network perspective, I can say that the opportunities are certainly meaningful.
Awesome. Now I know we're right against the edge of the hour, so did want to just thank you both, Barry and Dr. Wynand, for joining us today for Deep Dive. I always love these hours. I think you really get into the guts of a project, so I appreciate it, and everybody who joined for questions. Barry, I'll throw it back to you for a kind of last word as we summarize today, and then we'll let everybody go for the afternoon.
I just say that I hope today has been useful, and we're going to do our best over the coming period of time to continue to, take these more deep dives, step away from the big themes of the company, and really step into the detailed work that you're doing. I did ask Wynand to take on a good portion of this call today, and with good reason. I want investors to understand his credibility and the credibility that gives to the project, because at the end of the day, the viability of the project to step towards not just a construction decision, but full construction and towards cash flow, is off the back of the engineering that we're doing with very reputable firms, and of course, Wynand's experience. So trusting and hopeful that, you'll see the sincerity from our management team side to progress this project, one that's been sitting at feasibility study for a period of time, but really is in the right place now to move forward. And we think that the macro backdrop in the US is just facilitating the overall story. We look forward to progressing and look forward to giving an update again in the near future.
Awesome. Barry, Dr. Wynand, thank you so much. I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon. I'll echo the thanks in the chat from Kalenda, Peter, Holly, and others. This is a great hour. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Romeo.